Greetings, students. I'm Dr. Sadri, your instructor for this course. And today what I'm going to do is I'm going to focus on Chapter 7, okay? And Chapter 7's title is, as you know, Liberalism in our text. I think, again, your authors have done a pretty good job of presenting the major points of this, perspective. They have done a nice historical, review of the development in this way of thinking, and covering the assumption of it, the function of it, the advantages and I guess disadvantages too. Now, what I'm going to do again is that I'm going to go and highlight first of all the major point of the chapter. And I'm going to go to as many details because I already have provided you with what? With PowerPoint. So all the details are there. All you need to do is just follow my lead in that regard. Plus, then I have also provided you with chapter summaries and additional reading and questions and everything else. As you know, they're all available in the module. And then after I'm finished with this one, I'm going to give you a little bit, or actually I can mix some of it into some of the things that they have to say. Like, for example, they were not very, very clear about some of the assumption of the idealism, and I'm going to include it right here. This way you would have both perspectives. You have a comprehensive perspective. You have their perspective, and then you have also what I'm telling you, which is completing that body of what knowledge. So you would have a more information than any typical IR students. Okay, covering first of all what they are talking about. They start by talking about the roots of international relation in liberalism. Okay. Being very fine, British scholars themselves, all three of them, they start with basically the work of Jeremy Bentham, who was born in 1748 and passed away in 1832. So they go back to another British guy in that regard. And then after that, they start following the whole notion of the greatest good, is that right, as a concept. Then they talk about the practical approach. Then the next, scholar they really focus on is Immanuel Kant, who was born actually even before, Jeremy Bentham. He was born in 1724 and died in 1804. And then they talk about the notions of rationalism, which was very important in terms of the development of this field, and also empiricism. So those are the two major things that they cover in that part of the chapter. So by now, what are the keywords, is that right? Okay. Then the next topic they're focusing on is the root of IR liberalism. And in that regard, they go all the way back, to cover it. And historical perspective, which is very easy. It's just like a story to cover. And then they talk about the rise of IR liberalism. And that is important because that's when they try to connect it to that notion of idealism. And I thought right here, they were not as clear about some of the, idealism, assumption. So now I like to connect it to what I mentioned in Module 0 about the 4 assumptions of idealism. Let's go over there together. The first assumption of idealism in that regard would be called, preserving, acquiring, and applying power is not the essence of international relation and politics. That's one. Assumption number 2, pursuing ethical policy is not against national interest. All right? Number 3, world must seek a new system of order. Okay? And last but not least, humans are capable of more cooperation and less conflict. Now, if you remember the 4 major assumptions that I mentioned for you in previous lecture video, I mentioned 4 of them about the realism, is that right? These 4 basically go against those 4. I mean, one interesting question that I can have for you, for example, in terms of an essay question would be compare and contrast the 4 major assumptions of realism with 4 major assumptions of idealism. Is that right? You have the first 4, you have this 4, is that right? Compare and contrast them. You need to mention each one. You need to mention which one of these is contradicting which one of those. Is that right? So that would be an interesting thing. See, I'm giving you like little hints here and there. This is actually one of the questions in the question bank for essay. Okay, I'm not guaranteeing this question is going to come for you, but it's one of those questions. Okay, having said that, what else are they talking about? In terms of the idealism, your book actually focuses on the Fabian, Committee for supranational authority, okay, and the contribution that was done by Professor Wolf there. You know, the chapter focuses on that, so it's easy written, like a little history, you know, lesson, and you can focus on it. The next topic they're covering is what they call the behaviorist revolution. You might ask, who are behaviorists? Okay, you know, political science was basically taken away from a lot of studies about history, and as you can see, that a lot of it deals with, you know, historical trend, historical stories, historical figures, blah blah blah. Is that right? When political science came about, and as you know, we said political science, not political art. Is that right? The whole assumption was there are some special things about human behavior that we can actually what? Organize and categorize and put people in those categories. Okay? And then that way we can predict their behavior. So I usually in my classes, I say that any scholar is supposed to do three things. Is that right? Number one, they need to describe a what? A phenomenon or a situation. Two, they need to explain it, which deals with causality. What X causes Y, you know? I don't know. You eat ice cream quickly, you get a ice cream headache. Is that right? Okay, if you eat it too quickly. So, cause and effect. And last but certainly not least, they want to predict it. Well, guess what? This is nothing new, because when you are watching news, is that right? And you're watching the, anchor men and women, the weather men and women, what do? That's what they do before they predicted, weather for the next 3, 5, 7 days. First, they tell you what is the condition of the, climate right now. It's raining, or humidity is this, or whatever. Is that right? Or windy, or whatever. Okay. Then after that, what do they say? They said, well, we are thinking that the reason that there is a wind is because there is a high pressure right here, there's a low pressure right there, or there's a high temperature right there, or low temperature right here. And of course, nature wants to balance itself. It's natural. Nature has a dynamic sense of balancing all the time. Okay? So that's why the wind is coming, is created, and that's why the direction of it is this way as opposed to that way, because of the pressure points and temperature and blah blah blah. So they've already done the causation for you, X and Y. What causes what? Cause and effect. Last but not least, they say, okay, after all that description, all that explanation, let's see what we can forecast for the next few days, and that's what typical scientist does. That's what the behaviorist approach came about. Okay, that for the next 3 days we see sunny days or cloudy days and rainy days, and then they calculate the probability of that. Like for example, have you seen that they show, Monday there is a 30% chance of rain, Tuesday there is a 40% chance, by Wednesday it goes to like 60%. And then toward the end of the week, we are hoping, oh God, please make sure that at least weekend is, nice and sunny so I can get out of my office and home and, have a little bit of a good time. Is that right? Yeah, that's what we are hoping. Nature usually has its own ideas, of course. All right. So that's what I wanted to communicate with you in terms of the behaviorist approach, that they focus on behavior. Is that right? And they try to come up with some kind of scientific perspective on that. Now, having said that one, behaviorists also believe that there were some changes, like idealist over time has become what? Pluralist. Or idealism has become pluralism. I already covered idealism for you. So pluralism, I'm going to describe it in a second. Let me just go over the next one. The next one also says realism has led into neorealism. If you remember, we covered that one already. Is that right? In the previous chapter. The chapter covered that one, and my lecture also focusing on the major assumption of realism and different variant of it, already covered that. So going back to idealism, is that right? We already mentioned the 4 major assumption of it. When idealism leads to pluralism, what is pluralism? Well, when we are talking about pluralism, we are talking about a society that includes tremendous amount of diversity and inclusivity. Diversity in terms of ethnic, racial, religious, social group, etc. Is that right? Basically, we're talking about modern societies for all practical purposes, which includes everywhere. And as Americans, we are kind of used to, we are an immigrant country, we're kind of used to what we call hyphenated Americans. Chinese American, Japanese American, Italian American, French Americans, Arab Americans, Jewish Americans, Italian, you know what I mean? I mean, all of these hyphenated Americans, there's people that came from different places, is that right? Or they have different, religion and different, racial, characteristics. And well, we are used to it. You know what? I mean, they say a lot of things about, I'm not suggesting that we are a perfect country on the planet, is that right? Everybody has their own challenges. In comparison to a lot of different places, yes, and we have had a history of some problems here and there, but we have actually done pretty well for a young country. We're a young country. We're not a country that has even, 300 years of history yet. Is that right? As an independent country, we are basically a very young country. We are a young country, by the way. We have the oldest written constitution. Our constitution is the oldest written one in the world. Okay, so with all these things, it's not bad. You go to some of the other countries, like the traditional nation states of Europe, is that right? They have problem. France, I love France. I like French people. I like French food. I like French art. I like French wine, etc., etc. But you go over there, why do you think in some parts of, Paris, there are, all these problems that they have with their version of, African, French people. Is that right? These are people who came from their colonies, like from Algeria, from Tunisia, from Morocco. Is that right? And they didn't do what we did as an immigrant country. We did a pretty good job of what? Assimilating people. Assimilating and then providing with opportunities. So those of them, they work very, very hard. They can go all the way up to the society. In France, that hasn't always happened. That's why those people, they live in mini cities or ghettos, better to say. Is that right? Outside the city or something. So, I thought you would be happy to know that there are some advantages to what we have done in our history, because a lot of people, they criticize whatever we have done. And I'm not suggesting, I'm not suggesting we have had a perfect, history. Of course, what we have done to African Americans, Hispanics and Native Americans, and, the women, they didn't have rights for a number of years until, they finally got the right to vote and everything. That has not been fair. Is that right? But at least our system is trying to learn from its mistake. All right. Then after, they describe the pluralism and everything, then they go to the what? 5 major assumptions of it. I like to highlight it because I think they have done a pretty good job of describing it. Plus, I mentioned all of those in my what? PowerPoint. So just highlighting it, going over that with you one by one. Human nature is not wicked, which sounds like opposite of what? Opposite of what realists are talking about. State dominance has eroded. Yeah, okay, very interesting. Realists stress the importance of military power. Okay, remember that's what they were talking about. International system is not anarchical, is that right? Or anarchic, as some people say. And last but not least, the number 5 one, morality has a place in what? In IR, international relations. You know what? Let me just give you an example, since I don't give you a study guide, but I've always given you hints in terms of question in the question bank, in the large question bank that we have for quizzes, exams, and everything. For example, one nice short answer could be one of these. Like, for example, I can say, mention 3 out of the 5 major assumption of pluralism. That would be a question. That would be an interesting one. Is that right? So I want you to know how to study for our exams. All right. Then, of course, they go and they talk about Machiavelli and Gandhi and everything and the difference between those perspectives. And then they end the chapter by talking about the types of liberal IR thoughts. And in this regard, they distinguish between 2 groups, what they call the radical group and what they call the moderate group. The radical groups, they consider Richard Falk and Jean-Jacques Rousseau as radicals. Is that right? I'm going to come back to this. Okay, and they consider Nye, Joseph Nye and Robert Cohen as more modern one. Now, let's say a few words first of all about the radical. Radical ones, I guess the most famous one is Jean-Jacques Rousseau. Is that right? Who wrote Social Contract. Basically, social contract suggests that, and it's the essence of democracy and everything, isn't it? Social contract, what did it suggest? It suggested that there is a contract between the rulers and ruled. Is that right? So, the ruler basically promises that I'm going to protect you, I'm going to provide you with public goods and everything else so you can grow. And they rule, they say, okay, as long as you do that, I support you. Okay, here we go. How about if there is not such a thing? There's no such a social contract. If there is not such a social contract, then the public, is that right, reserve the right of changing the ruler. This idea also has affected our country from its establishment by what? By reserving the right that if the government is not doing such and such and such, we reserve the right to change it. Okay? So this goes to the essence of democracy and what we call popular sovereignty. So in other words, sovereignty, or that power, is all, the ultimate source of it is our people. Okay? Now, we take this one for granted because in the US Constitution it starts with "we the people." Is that right? Do you think all over the world, do you think all the constitutions are like that? No. Some constitutions provide, talk about the power really belongs to the Lord. Is that right? Or God. Or, the Arabic word for some, Allah. Is that right? Like Islamic Republic of Iran, power is basically in the hand of the Lord, who, kind of provides with these certain chosen leaders or something, and then they lead. You see what I mean? That's why, for example, over there, the leaders sometimes, they justify that I have a lot more power because of what the system is allowing me and our tradition. Okay, so this is the so-called radical views. Now let's talk about the more moderate one. The moderate one they're using is what? Joseph Nye and Robert Cohen. Nye and Cohen, in 1977, they did a very important book, and that was called, Power and Interdependence. What did they suggest? They said that it was different from a traditional realist perspective, you see. They said that international system is not just consisting of states. In addition to that, there are international organizations. In addition to international organizations, there are transnational actors. In addition to transnational actors, there are non-state, actors, which later on people, they assume that Cohen and Nye have said, because they didn't say that exactly like that. The bottom line was this, that because international relation, Cohen and Nye, they thought, it's not just relations among states. If that was the case, it would have been only interstate relations or intergovernmental relations, okay? Because that would make that to be very, very basic and simple. They said, no. Beyond that one, there is relationship between government of one country and people of another country. Is that right? And vice versa. So there's more channels of what? Communication. So communication is not only at the state level, it's also at the national level. For example, when we go to another country, is that right? We go as a tourist, or we go as a business person. Is that right? Or we go, I get invited here and go constantly to give all these talks. Is that right? Representing UCF or, some other organization here and there. Fine, okay. I'm not representing the United States of, government. I'm representing my university or my, for example, associations, okay? So here we go. That's a nation-to-nation talk communication. So here we go, like international relation. It's not just interstate. And sometimes we get actually to do something different. Like what? There are times that I've put, let's say, workshop, for Foreign Ministry of Kuwait. So Foreign Ministry of Kuwait, representing the government of Kuwait, here invites me as an American professor to go over there. I don't have a, it's not like, for example, they invited somebody from US State Department, which would be their WAD counterpart. Is that right? They invited me to go over there, and I have, all the words and everything else that they've given me, to train their, basically diplomats, to make sure that they know how to operate an international scene with American diplomats or Western diplomats, etc., etc. That's one. It can happen also the other way around. We could invite somebody coming from, for example, Kuwait or somewhere else to teach us about their how they handle work. So, as I mentioned, Cohen and Nye, they did a very interesting work in that regard. So, Power and Interdependence, published in that year, was a in 1997, the year I mentioned, is a very earth-shattering work which added to the sense of liberalism. Having said that, I've covered the chapter, I've covered the weaknesses of the chapter, I've provided you with additional material. But still, if you have any question, what do? You email me, okay? I'm always here to help you. Thank you.